We're the only ones here?
We are so far.
Well,
Might be
yeah,
a quick meeting.
that'd be fine with me.
We got a couple of folks here. I don't know how many we're supposed to have.
I heard from everyone except for Angela.
So everyone that they're going to be here?
Yes.
Oh, all right. See, we don't have a case, and this is what happens. Mr. Taylor has joined us. So Shelley, are we missing anyone?
We were just missing Angela.
And
she
she
wait-
said,
She didn't respond, so I'm not sure if she will be here.
okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. So I will call the Board of Adjustments and Appeals meeting to order. We don't have any cases, but we do have the approval of minutes from September 9th. Do I have a motion and a second?
I move to approve the minutes from September 9th, 2020.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Oh, there's Angela. And so she's muted, so we'll wait until she gets
Sorry.
Oh, no sweat.
Okay, I'm here.
All right. So she just got off her raft to join us, I hope.
Yeah.
Angie, we're voting. It's the September 9th, 2020 draft minutes. I have a motion and a second. All in favor of approving those minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Are there any anyone not in favor of approving those minutes? Nobody. So those are adopted. Approval finding of fact for case VAR 2020-005 2740 South Pennsylvania Street. I need a motion and a second.
I'll move to approve the findings of fact for case VAR 2020-005.
Thank you.
I'll second that.
Second. So all those in favor of adopting, we'll do a voice vote. Say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, so those have been adopted. Approval finding of fact for case VAR 2020-006 4295 South Lincoln Street. I need a motion and a second.
I move to approve the findings of fact for case VAR 2020-006.
And I'll second again.
Perfect, thank you guys. We'll do a voice vote again. All in favor of adopting the finding of fact for VAR 006, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? No one is indicating opposed. So those are adopted. So I think we're on to, Shelley, it looks like public comment. Or are we doing staff? Is that part of,
It's the public, and it looks like we don't have anybody
okay,
on.
okay. So then we're on to staff and Mr. Burkholder's briefing. How he's going to change our lives forever.
I am, actually. You won't know what hits you after tonight. So thank you, Chair Finn. Good evening, members of the board. I'm going to share my screen here, so bear with me for a second. And this was a little quirky earlier, so I hope it behaves this time. Oops. Everybody's seeing that, I trust and hope.
Yes.
So what we wanted to do tonight, we've had some really brief conversations about this project before, but we're going to give you a little bit of an overview of the Title 16 Community Outreach and Assessment project that we're working on. We've been at it since early September, and we're in the tail end of phase 1 of the outreach project. And so we're bringing this to the boards and commissions for continuing dialogue with you all. We'll get into this a little bit later, but we've heard from quite a few community members already, so we'll talk a little bit about that. we'll do an exercise with you tonight, and then we'll talk about next steps. I'm going to just give a brief overview, but I have Bruce Megan, a principal with Logan Simpson, with us tonight, as well as Melissa Ruth, a planner with Logan Simpson. They are consulting with us to work through this initial project, which will eventually lead in 2021 to the rewrite of the Title 16 code in the city. So why, you might ask, are we taking this on? I think most of you probably know. We need to assess and ensure that Englewood's core policy documents and land use regulations are congruent with the community goals and values for a sustainable Englewood. 2004 was the last time the zoning code, or Title 16, was holistically, comprehensively looked at and changed. Now, as you know, we've made piecemeal changes here and there. The STR ordinance, short-term rental, the ADU, accessory dwelling unit ordinance, were all additions and revisions to the code that we most recently made. But in terms of looking at things comprehensively, we have not done that since 2004. And of course, we have a comprehensive plan that's 2015, 2016 vintage. We have, the walk and wheel plan. We have transportation plans. We have several core policy documents in the city that are much more recent than the zoning code or Title 16. And we want to make sure those documents are all speaking together, and we're all moving forward in the best way that the community goals and values are calling for. So I mentioned we're in the first phase of this process, and that includes reviewing the Unified Development Code and those other core policy documents. We've been listening to the community goals, and in the end of all of this, we will be providing recommendations to ensure that the UDC reflects Englewood's vision for the future. As you know, the UDC is the one of the tools, the regulatory tools that the city has to implement the comprehensive plan and these other plans that I mentioned. So, as I said, we want to make sure everything's talking to one another and we're all sort of on the same page moving forward. So that is, in a nutshell, what our process is. I will mention also that there is no rewriting happening at this time. This is just a community outreach to hear people's thoughts about what's working, what's not working, what needs to be changed, what needs to be added to the code, and that sort of thing. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Bruce, who will walk us through the next couple of slides.
Good evening, board. Thank you for having us this evening. I will give you a little primer here because our goal today is to hear from you. So we'll speak for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll just open it up for discussion, and we'll definitely get you out, or at least done with this part of your agenda way before 8 o'clock. So one of the outcomes for the assessment is really to listen to the community and our boards, commissions, groups, stakeholders, and really determine what sort of the why for this project of what are we trying to do here and why. Some of the things that are initial outcomes for this assessment is really looking at the dimensional regulations aligning with neighborhood character. You have an updated comprehensive plan as well as other tiered studies. A lot of those talk about neighborhood character and values, each one in different degrees. However, we want to make sure that our code is aligned with those plans. That includes anything we can do to make sure that we improve our neighborhoods, whether that, that doesn't mean not going up in terms of height or not expanding, but it's making sure that we do it in a way that's flexible, but also predictable. Other components clearly that were noted early on were parking regulations, and these are always interesting ones. In some cases, parking that supports and promotes walkability, which could mean parking maximums, to parking minimums in some way, in other cases where you're trying to promote, additional parking for certain areas. So parking is going to be definitely a key discussion and not an easy one. Sustainability is also one that's it's a broad term, but again, Englewood is moving towards sustainability. We want to make sure our code is supportive of that where feasible, and that's everything from providing solar access to other factors as it relates to especially the point before about walkability. The other one that's no news to, probably not new to you, is housing options. And that's making sure that we do have the ability to provide a life cycle housing, missing middle, what have you. Englewood's a complete community, and we want to make sure that there are at least options for housing types, but done in the right way. All right, you can click me, Wade. So what have we heard so far? So, for the first phase, outreach is going pretty well, considering, some of the limitations with our environment and so on. So far, so good. It's a passionate discussion, so you can see these pulses of people inputting. And you can just think about the slide before this, and you know why they're inputting. And that includes a telephone town hall where you had 400 people on the phone at one time, setting exercise, and lots of good comments. Current online questionnaire, which continues to increase in input, reaching close to 700. And then meetings like we are having with you, with essentially just getting groups together either in person or in a venue like this, where we're just listening to what people's thoughts are, to trying to appropriately do in-person meetings where appropriate. In this case, there was we did 5 park open houses, and those were done with social distancing, but also the ability for people to ask questions and at least make not face-to-face contact, but at least eye contact. And then also clearly, working with P&Z and City Council and currently our steering committee. So a lot of outreach on this one, because it's really about gathering information that sets the stage for what we're actually going to hone in on in 2021. All right, and who are we hearing from? It's important that we hear from, boards and commissions, because a lot of it's been residents, and it's residents that are, obviously concerned about their neighborhoods, but also residents that also want flexibility. So it's a tough one where you're trying to balance that. The comprehensive plan tries to speak to that, but definitely the code is where the rubber meets the road. So lots of input from residents, but also these other boards and commissions. Again, it depends how people also self-identify themselves. A lot of people on boards and commissions are also residents. So. And then I find this an interesting slide. I think it depicts a little bit what's going on in Englewood, but not only are you about 50% familiar with the code, they may be familiar with the code, but they're definitely familiar with the effects of the code or the results of the code. And you folks deal with that on a monthly basis here. But they're definitely familiar with, what is resulting from the code and want to input on that. And about 50% are actually familiar with the actual code itself. And then the question that we asked about, does the code adequately represent where we are today? Given the date, it's not surprisingly that it's about, again, 50%, say it doesn't adequately represent, where we're going. And that's, a reflection of the sort of the age of the code and the fact that it hasn't been updated since these other plans. Also that, the world has changed, and so has Englewood. But also that the discussions around growth of those that are supportive of it, those who want a little more flexibility with housing types, those that are more interested in more aggressive sustainability initiatives. It's a split or mixed bag, and each one of these ones depends on the person you're talking to. So there's a delicate balance that we're treading here to make sure that we get it right. But we're definitely starting with listening. And then, you know, not surprisingly, most respondents haven't directly worked with the code or took something directly from, you know, A to Z in the code itself. It is code, so it's tends to be a little bit more technical. When we talk to people, though, we definitely are staying at the high level for this phase, and we can dig into the language later on for those who are interested in going there. All right, and then what we've heard, so this is your primer. You may have lots of other ones and then very specific examples, but we've heard so far ADUs or accessory dwelling units are clearly big, and the ability to do those are important to people. Not everyone agrees with them. They do cause, you know, they come with sometimes extra vehicles, extra people, but and sometimes extra height and so on. So for the most part, though, people are definitely interested in that discussion and that evolution of the code standards. Parking standards, the idea there is, you know, we already mentioned that in some places, people mention that they would like to see less parking and a move towards other ways of getting around, from walking to pathways to bikes to you know, just having to park a little bit farther away, with that interest of you know, reducing our reliance on the single occupancy vehicle and reducing our VMT and becoming a more sustainable community. Also, it was, you know, just mentioned today, that idea that you know, the world's also changed in terms of technology is rapidly increasing, and our reliance on having, you know, 2 to 3 cars in a household, which is on average, of that no longer being the case. And then also the implications of technology changing the need for that as well. This idea of walkability, we mentioned a little bit, but that comes up quite a bit, both parking as well as methods to meter parking and so on, definitely has a focus of encouraging walkability. Also, you know, sort of made even more apparent during COVID is home occupation or businesses within a home are clearly a factor. And do we look at that again? In addition to that, the ability to have, you know, how many families can live in a home, especially as economics are getting tough. That will be a factor as well. And how do we do that in a way that doesn't diminish a neighborhood? And then lastly, not to underestimate this one, because I was reminded today not to, is dimensional standards. You know, there's no getting around this one, and it's something that we need to find a creative solution for, where at least people understand that we are attempting to make this work, and that's you know, whether it's bulk plane to height to setbacks, you know, some people are not happy with the intensity of development in key neighborhoods, and so trying to make it better while still allowing for that variety of house type. So I did that as fast as we can because I know I'm talking to an informed audience. So we're going to move to listening, and there are a series of questions here, and how we'll do this is really informal. We'll read these questions, and I'll unfortunately have to read them out loud to you to make sure you're paying attention. But then we're going to go around and we're just going to make sure that everyone speaks and speaks to something here about what they think is important. So we're able to take note of that. So it can be anything you want within these questions. It can be all of them or one of them or something else. But we really want to know what's working well. Clearly, from your positions, you hear what's not working well. So you'll definitely be able to speak to that. but also the application process, whether it's a community member or a business, is that working? Should we change that? Are there specific, more subtle design standards that you've been thinking of that need to be modified in the code? And lastly, are there any standards, topics, or innovation that need to be added to the code? Again, you don't have to look up the code. You can just mention it. We'll do a double check with any comment that you make to see if it's valid or whether it's in there or not, and also what we can do with it. So on that note, as promised, I will stop talking and we'll open it up to the group. But I will check to make sure you speak. So, and then we'll just do a round robin and then we'll send you on your way.
All right, who wants to go first?
Don't all jump for it.
Yeah, and I'll also, with our group, again, I informal, and if someone says something that kind of pings something that you're thinking of, you can join in.
I'll start, actually.
Perfect.
This is Brendan. I actually have two comments. First of all, you made a comment on obviously walkability and reducing parking downtown and stuff like that. But I was wondering, I used to love walking, but I have MS and had it for 20 years. So now my mobility is not as good. So do we have anything that we are looking at as far as handicap parking and or accessibility for people with mobility issues?
Great. I think that's something that we take note of, and unless Wade wants to add that, add to that. But I think you make a great point. You can talk in generalizations here, saying, hey, let's reduce parking, but the reality is it has to work for everyone. And so that idea that it's compliant for all folks is probably equally as important than that conversation about parking. The other point I must make is that on the parking side, it's not a one-way street. People have talked about this idea of reducing parking to promote walkability. There is an equal group that talks about accessibility, primarily for businesses. But in the case of Brendan, it's the case that you make is even more poignant, is making sure that we allow for or making sure we encourage access to businesses in the right way. So, do you have anything to add on that?
I just wanted to add that the city does have an ADA transition plan that looks at connections. How do you get from the sidewalk to the front door of a business? It does come up quite a bit, actually, with a lot of businesses in the downtown. Where are the striped spots, or where are the marked spots that you can park? We even have a lot of, the city has certain parking districts where you have tagged parking, so you are assigned a spot on the street. And we even have had to revise some of those regulations to make sure that those that need spaces closer are able to get them, especially over in the medical district. Right. So yeah, I think it is a part of the walkability discussion. I think we need to definitely continue to pay attention to it, and the city does have and does recognize those sorts of critical paths for handicap users.
Because I think it's great that we, as a city, are reviving downtown. I love to go downtown. And obviously restaurants and stores and things like that. So I think that what we've done, if we can expand on that, to obviously encompass that kind of accessibility, I think would be a bonus.
Absolutely.
And I might add that the other component of it is not just about limiting parking. In this case, as Wade was sort of alluding to, it's also increasing the ability to get around in a seamless fashion. So that's everything from sidewalks to crosswalks and so on. Because it was pointed out today that, for those, even for those that where walking is easy, you you don't have curb cuts in certain areas or access on the sidewalk, and they've got kids or whatever, they're just going to drive. So.
And I do have another question, and Bruce, this might be more for you, I'm not sure, or Wade. 5G is coming. I'm sure that the city of Englewood has been hit up by many of the carriers. Do we have anything in place for the code revision and looking at what's current and what might be happening with essentially these wireless companies going to light poles and things in the right of way that they can, in theory, put up without any of our input?
Yeah, that one, but a great comment.
Absolutely, and absolutely, Brendan, we have been approached by most all of the companies about 5G. Mostly they are going in light poles. Of course, the utilities will install their own light pole with this technology in it. So most of them are in the right of way. As of right now, there is not anything in the code for that. So we basically issue a right-of-way encroachment agreement with these companies right now. It's essentially a permit through the Public Works Department, just to verify that there's no site distance issues and so forth. So we do have quite the section in Title 16 on telecommunications that really needs some serious tweaking because it's incredibly confusing.
Right.
Not that the whole topic isn't confusing, but I think we can do a lot to streamline a lot of the requirements and what needs to happen. Of course, I was just going to say the municipality doesn't have necessarily a whole lot of authority over it. We're bound by, we need to allow it. So it's finding that process that works for everybody.
Right. Because actually I've been in the wireless industry for almost over 20 years now, so I've seen the good and the bad and the ugly.
I bet so.
But I've been able to work, throughout everything. But just as a little insight, it's if you can make the process easier for the wireless carriers in what you want to see ultimately, they'll take the path of least resistance.
Right.
Right. So it's like, hey, you can do this administratively, or you can go through a hearing process if you really want it in the front of someone's yard. If you want to stress that, hey, or if they want to stress that we have the right to put it in the right of way. But you're like, well, if you go to the corner, you can get this in 30 days or 60 days. So,
yep.
But I'm kind of veering off on that. But I was just curious about a wireless code ordinance or change.
You may have volunteered yourself for some additional work later on.
And you know what? I don't have a problem with that because, again, it's one of those things that I hate to see bad cell sites. I know that no one likes them, but I do take, like, for instance, doing one in Basalt and had the support of the entire community because we came up with a good plan, how it looked, how it was going, where it was going, how it was represented, how it looked ultimately. Nice. As opposed to just sticking up a pole because their code was old and it allowed us to do it and then have the resentment of the community for the next 15, 20, 25 years.
Not fun. Awesome.
Can I just step in for a minute, Tom? It's Dugan.
Yes, please, Dugan.
Just to answer and to add on to what Wade was saying, we do have a small cell license agreement that we provide to all of the providers who come to us requesting that they be allowed to put a pole in our right of way or to use one of our existing traffic poles. They have used some of Excel's poles, which we don't have a lot of authority over because that's an agreement between Excel and the small cell provider. So just to add to what Wade was already talking about, and that is one of the issues that I brought up with regard to the rewrite of Title 16 to make sure we put some regulations in there regarding that, if that helps.
It does.
And Bruce, if you want, I would be more than happy to anything I can do to help out in this situation. I'd be more than happy to do that.
Scary words, so we may be coming back to you here. So. All right. Next, any next victims? All right, Randall. Randall, right?
This sort of brought up a question that I have, and it has to do with public works or whatever we call it in Englewood. And just there seems to be a disconnect between Chapter 16 and what regulations and codes are for right-of-way stuff. But they overlap when you develop a project. So I've found in the one that I've been working on that I understand the regulations pretty well from Chapter 16 and from talking to the city about it, but didn't really get feedback and don't have a way to check what the regulations are for all the public works. So it's kind of the same thing with the cell site. How is that all regulated and how is that accessible?
Well, that's a good question.
It's a good question.
I'll say that you're not alone in the concern over sort of some of the overlap between the departments. The Title 16 does have several areas in it that really has in the past few months to a year been reworked by Public Works. You know, with regard to drainage and excavation permits and you know, we have the floodplain ordinance in Title 16, but Public Works really administers the floodplain program for the city. So there's been a lot of reworking of the construction documents by Public Works in the past that, you know, we really do have a disconnect, but there are also a lot of things in the code where the Title 16 is adopted by ordinance and is the law, if you will, whereas you know, the construction and design manuals are not. So they're guidelines and so forth. So we have to make sure we're incorporating and complementary of our two departments' work programs, and that can be hard to do. So it is a noted disconnect in several areas, as I mentioned, but you know, with Title 16 being an ordinance-driven document, you know, that in the end is what and where a lot of these regulations need to live. And if you have anything else, Dugan, to add to that or have another thought, I'd be happy to have you chime in again, but that's sort of what I see and how I see those overlaps being treated.
I don't have anything to add on that score at this point. Wade.
Okay.
All right, Angela, you're unmuted. That means, did you want to jump in here? You know, no, I'm not hearing from Angela. What about
I will throw some stuff out and maybe other people will pile on. So we've and I was trying to think of cases, and what about slot homes? I know Denver has banned them, and we had the one case that the guy was going to build a slot home, and he needed the driveway, so he didn't get it. He ended up doing a duplex. But what about slot homes?
Well, actually, what do you think about slot homes? Because I mean,
I'm not a fan.
I mean, you guys are in the know, so I mean, is that something we look at or don't look at? Is more of a question.
Well, I think that's probably something to look at. Like I said, I know Denver banned them. The one case that we had, the guy had designed a slot home, but it was a driveway width issue.
Okay.
And there was a lot of the people that showed up to gripe against the design of the house. I think it was a triplex, kind of slotted. He ended up, because we didn't give him variance, but he ended up then coming back and designing a duplex. And I think he came back to us and asked for a variance for something, and it was more in line, and we granted it. But it was something that then I think the community really embraced, because it was a little bit more, even though it was a duplex, it was less slottish. And I know Denver's had problems with those.
Right. Any other opinions on
Yeah,
that?
I would say I think some of the feedback we got at that time, we weren't considering it, but it was the orientation of some of these attached single family homes, how are they oriented to the street. I think that was what people were reacting to, of just the bulk of this, and then but just also it just didn't seem to fit with what they wanted to see. And obviously it wasn't that they were against everything, but we were really constrained in what we were looking at. He was close to being able to do it. It wasn't that many feet that he was asking for.
Yeah,
they were required to have a certain width of driveway. He could have probably done a smaller driveway, but it was like that and side yard stuff, if I remember right.
Yeah.
Oh,
Go ahead.
oh, how about our gas station stacking spaces?
I had
Just
that on
gas
my
stations
list
in
as well.
general. Yeah.
Gas stations and the stacking, yes.
Yeah.
This is a good group. These are new ones.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we did figure out that as the code reads, it requires, I don't know, more stacking spaces than any existing gas station in the city actually has. And the board ended up denying their request for a variance because it didn't really fit the criteria. So it would have been a somewhat smaller gas station, maybe less pumps than they wanted to fit. Anyway, it didn't seem like most of the lots in the city that could have a gas station would be able to meet this standard as it exists.
Right. So if I could chime in a little bit on that one, what our code says is that you have the car at the pump, and you have 2 spaces behind the pump. And so when you're looking at sort of some of these the newer gas stations, you can pump on both sides, and you kind of stack the pumps, and your stacking spaces cannot, of course, back up into the travel aisles. So that's where we ended up with the case that's being mentioned, is they were ending up having parking spaces in the travel aisle because they didn't have a large enough lot or a wide enough lot. So that code is a newer code, and all of the older gas stations in town, of course, aren't to that standard. So we had a company come in wanting to put in a new gas station, and they ran into that new code that required that. I don't know. I think there was a history. I don't remember what the history was of why that code was put in there in the first place. But anyway, that's sort of a little bit of background for it.
Yeah, and from what I remember, I think there was questions about some definitions about, like, if the car in place actually counted, or if, again, something that to be looked at.
If you can pull up to it from 2 directions, which way's behind.
Right, which one's behind, if there's, it was.
So the wording needs to be rearranged a little bit to be a little more clear there.
Right.
Yeah. Anyone else want to jump in? I got a couple more from cases.
Can we talk about side yards?
No. Yes.
Yeah.
We have a lot of side yards that were built. I mean, houses that were built with side yards under older versions of the code that have different side yards based on north or south, or there's just some cases where there's a lot of existing nonconformities, and we have a neighborhood in a city where people want to add onto their houses. And so we just see lots of cases where there's not enough flexibility in the side yards to deal with the existing context. And people that want to do something in line with the character, it doesn't even look different from the street, but that seems to be an issue. And then we had one recently with front setback that what was on paper for that district didn't even match what was on the street. And so some sort of contextual front setback could also be some flexibility in certain cases as well.
I think Denver has a better average, or they have average.
Yeah, you can you can measure. Yeah.
So that if you have a neighborhood that has everything set up further, everything set back further, the 25-foot doesn't necessarily fit all.
Good one. Keep them coming. These are great.
Yep. So, and also in line with that, fencing and side yards and front street, that when a house is actually, and this usually happens to us when the house is on the corner and the address is actually on one street, but the house is fronting onto the other street.
Mm.
So in order for them to have a fence, they need to get a variance, because what we look at would be their backyard is actually a side yard because of the way the city. So that would be another one to try to have wording that maybe not only takes into consideration that the address of the lot, but actually how the house is oriented.
Right. Good one.
Do we want porches not to count in our front setback, you guys? We've talked about that, right? Or I could be misremembering.
I think it's always a question of if they do.
Yeah, I always get confused.
Yeah.
Some codes don't count them if they're not enclosed, and yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, porches. So this was a crazy.
We don't know.
Yeah, we don't. Well, and that's, yeah. I don't. I mean, because right now, remember, I think that we allow them to encroach, because usually a lot of these older houses, like if they build a front porch, it goes into the setback.
Is that?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
That's the way Denver's is written too. It's a matter of how far you're allowed to encroach into it if it's not enclosed.
Right. Okay. That's pretty normal, but it'd be good if there's clarity there. Sounds like there's not. So.
And then this is going to bring back some fond memories, I'm sure. Do you guys remember the zone of transparency discussion with window?
No.
It's around it was around the hospital, and they had to have windows.
Oh, yeah.
Windows had to.
Well, also the retail space that got changed, right?
Yeah, the retail space, the windows. That was a weird one that we struggled with.
So there's a bottom floor retail space minimum for certain zone districts.
In like parking garages, right? Is that the one?
Yeah,
Wade, help me out.
Yeah, you need to have a certain percentage of your ground floor to be transparent. So it has to be windows, it can't be walls, and that includes parking garages. And
Right.
the question becomes, what materials are transparent? Do you it kind of snowballs from there.
Yeah, and it was the infamous lot that was going to be a dermatology clinic that has never been built.
That's right.
But he was saying, and rightfully so, that he had to have all these windows, but yet those were going to be his exam rooms.
You couldn't get curtains, as I recall.
I think it was weird. I mean,
Yeah.
and I'm sure that's why it was never built. I'm sure that was.
That's the reason.
Well, that one also had all the pieces of how large it was and not being able to fill up the lot in a particular zone that really wants 70% of the lot filled.
Right.
Trying to encourage the walkability and the pedestrian stuff again. So part of the problem on that is, are all the lots that we have zoned that way, they really work that way? Is that really how we want it done? I mean, it made sense to me, but it wasn't the right product for that lot.
And this is
that
mostly
medical district?
Yeah, I was going to say this is a lot of the medical district that has that requirement.
Yeah.
In it. Yep.
And before we look at So somewhat related to the transparency, the commercial space requirement on the main floor of buildings in certain zone districts. We've had a lot of variances granted for like new duplexes just south of Hamden in that area where things are zoned central business district and don't really seem like they are central business district.
Right. So yeah, you have a lot of houses in that area that, you know, or you can redevelop for duplexes or whatnot, but the zone requires you have ground floor commercial and X percentage, and so yeah.
You could maybe get by it with the live work dwelling.
Right.
Yeah, but that's not ideal.
Didn't we have a weird one with buffers? And like, I remember it was up against like the PUD, the Ironworks PUD. There was some weird buffer that we had with like a, there was
Changing
something
of
with,
districts or changing of
yeah, it was like an artist
Borderlands?
studio or something. I'm gonna have
Yeah.
to look that one up, but it was something really weird with buffers that was like, it was residential to residential. It wasn't a problem, but because it was a PUD or something, it needed to be like almost half the lot set back or something from for some sort of buffer. It was really odd because it had been rezoned to PUD.
Are you able to track that one down? Think.
I mean, it's
in our history. It could have been last year, maybe.
I know. That's what I was thinking. I mean, it would be looking at cases because it
was Ironworks. It was near Ironworks,
It was
right?
near Ironworks. It was on. It would have been on like Bates.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that one, but I can look through the last couple years.
Yeah. Yeah, that was weird. Another one, so I jotted down accessory structures because I think we had, Mr. Taylor, there was one that you dealt with that was on the side of the house, and that I know that I think they're supposed to be behind the house, and then I think the city has said before that they were looking at different, like, because some people have bigger side yards to move those around. I think that's, to me, that would be something to revisit and maybe update.
Okay.
We need some sort of mechanism for like an ADA variance. We had a property that they were looking for an ADU for a caretaker, and the property was not zoned to allow an ADU. And they couldn't rezone, I think it was a spot zoning issue, into a zone district that would allow an ADU. And the man clearly had disabilities. He needed a caretaker on the property. And so we need some sort of relief valve. It didn't fit the criteria for a hardship related to the land, but we need some sort of relief valve if it's an ADA accommodation.
Good one.
Yep, that would be, because that was one of those that would have been nice had we been able to grant it, because it was well done and enough room and all that. So I know, is the city looking at making like enlarging the area that can have, or increasing the area that can have ADUs?
I'm gonna go with that's in the realm of possibility. Yes.
And then I think we need to keep the drinking, that you can have a drink and take it outside in downtown Englewood. If we could keep that, that would be nice.
Definitely will evaluate that. Agreed.
Anyone else? I have bulk planes. We've had issues. We've had discussions about that, especially on some of the lots that kind of go towards Broadway that slope down. Do you remember those discussions, that the average of the lot in front and back? And
yeah, it's like where you're measuring the bulk plane from, because the slope of the lot can.
Right.
Yeah.
That actually came up.
Really need a front and back, or different ways to do that. Like Denver has front and back.
Yeah, and and I think that came up, that it was on the the one that's across from Kachina Taco, that development, I think, was talking about, which was that apartments or condos, and they had the 4, there's a whole bunch of different averages that, because that's lot sloped.
Right. That one did, you know, that town hall meeting that we had was interesting to have 400 people on a phone call. But that was one of the more substantial comments that came out of that was bulk plane on a slope. So I was like, all right, that's a good one.
That was what I jotted down. What else do we have? Anything? I know we've griped a lot. I just need to start taking notes of when I gripe.
That was a good list, though. I mean, they're all direct changes. So, you know, it's not the number, it's the quality of the list. So.
Any definitional things, definitions of things that you can think of?
Wasn't there that one with like auto use? Auto was it the knuckleheads one?
It was the knuckleheads.
There was a definition there that was troublesome.
Vehicle, I think, was it vehicle?
Oh yeah, because they wanted a small vehicle permit.
I think it was a vehicle, and they were dealing with motorcycles, and they have enough room, and especially like on Broadway, I think that corridor would be to look at, because I think there's some little tweaks there.
Yeah, but there was a confusing definition in there, just like, yeah.
Yeah.
Auto body with fender work and without fender work is differently classified. So yeah, there's some interesting definitions in there.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to look at highlights, and a lot of my highlights are all around accessory structures.
Aaron, did you have any additions?
I think most of my comments are more holistic, so I depart ways with urban a little bit, but you know, my general comments are people are drawn more towards, you know, the character in Englewood rather than anything else from the surrounding neighborhood. So, you know, with the revitalization of downtown Englewood, I think people are drawn to that. So instead of preserving Englewood, it's more kind of expanding the character of Englewood to continue to attract more people and continue growth and businesses. So one thing I do notice is bicycle sharing and infrastructure, trying to connect the Swedish medical campus to the rest of the surrounding communities, crossings across Broadway, so Hamden. So that's kind of my general observation. So.
Well, that's a good one, and it's we always have to. It's important to hear that perspective, because there's a lot of you know, don't change anything perspective, which is not, you know, a realistic thing, and you're dealing with that all the time. So.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I'll throw it out there. If there's anything else, oh, Randall, you got one for us. All right, go.
I was going to circle back just to the slot home conversation.
Slot home, yeah.
And I just don't like the product because it turns its back and its people away from walkability. I mean, it's doing the opposite of everything that I think the city's really trying to do by putting side entrances on every product that they build just in order to fill up a site. You know, apartment buildings would be better because everybody would have to come and go to the front. As it is, they come and go into their garage and never see
Right.
any other people.
Right? Yep.
Yeah, and I mean, I think Englewood's been blessed because we haven't experienced some of the slot homes that Denver had. I think our first one that ever came in front of us was that one case, and I will hand it to the developer because the finished product was the duplex that I think the neighborhood really liked and appreciated better, and it faced the front.
Right.
My office is downtown Littleton, and they're doing them like crazy down here, and it's just nuts. I mean, it doesn't make sense for a city to look like that and to act like that.
It's a tough, yeah, it's a tough one, and I could see us getting backlash. You know, I mean, we can definitely look at them, but knowing that we're trying to integrate development, allowing them may have more negatives than benefits. I looked it up just in Denver on the main line. The first article that comes up for Denver is Denver's crackdown on slot homes comes too late. So,
yeah. Well, and that's so because, you know, Englewood, they're legal in Englewood right now. I mean, the only reason that one came in front of us was I think it was he needed the driveway width for fire code or something. It was something weird.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's, to be honest, I mean, I'm not a fan, and I thought about myself going to council with the Denver ban and advising council it's something they need to think about because it does change the character.
Yeah, with a little more lot width, you could do it.
Yeah.
Right.
Another way to maybe think about it is requirement for entries to face the front, not allowing side entries for buildings more than two buildings. I mean, more than 2 units.
Right. That's what.
That kind of look.
Yeah, that's what I looked up. They actually show us it's a slot home with regulations applied, addressing the things that you're talking about, Randall, and it makes a heck of a difference. So it's maybe not a complete no. It's, you know, if you can manage the following, then you can meet, you know, the character goals. Gotcha.
Yeah, do you guys remember the case? They didn't get the variance. It was kind of on a corner. It was a triplex. There was a power pole. I don't remember what they were. I guess they wanted, was it a setback or how they were attached? But I mean,
that was a side setback deal because of the pole
and the garage. Yeah. And that's one of those that a lot of people showed up, but I mean, it was something that they could have built had they moved the pole, and I didn't think, I mean, it was huge for the neighborhood, but it wasn't slot homish because I think everything faced the front.
Right.
They built something.
Did they? I need to drive.
Yeah,
by.
over at Depot Park, yeah.
That's like 3 doors down. Have you seen like the guy that has like the observatory in his backyard? It's like 3 or 4 doors down. We need more observatories. If we could push that, I would be a fan of that.
Good one. Good. I'm glad you brought that back around.
What else we got? Anything?
We don't see when things go well because we don't get cases.
Yeah, right.
So we're on the. This is something I've observed not through our cases, but it relates to parking, and it looks like a lot of the stuff that's come in as PUDs in the last, I don't know, decade or so have a lot fewer. They have a lower parking requirement than what's allowed by right. It'd be nicer if a lot more of these things were allowed, if it were just more equitable, that what was allowed by right was a lot closer to what people are negotiating and didn't have to go through some of those hoops, because the PUD process gets very political very fast. And it'd just be nice to be more predictable in line with the regular code district.
Agreed.
The last one that just popped in my head was, which I understood why they didn't get a variance, but the residential lots that back up to Broadway, that then back up to commercial, they wanted to put in a higher fence. Y'all remember that one? And I think the way it was, I can't remember, there was, I think some height, ground height difference on each side, but the code only allows 6 foot, and on something like that, to me, it would make sense. But I mean, you know, it would only be along that Broadway corridor.
And they weren't doing it for visual, they were doing security.
It was, yeah, she had some security issues,
Gotcha.
but that's all I got. Anyone?
A lot.
Well, everyone, I was looking forward to this all day, which sounds weird, but you didn't disappoint. So that was great. So if you think of anything else, just email them, in an email to Wade, and we'll roll them in. And especially since you're obviously well informed, and you have an interesting job, so a great one actually. So appreciate all your efforts too, and hopefully we'll make it easier for you.
Bruce, we'll invite you to the next one where the public yells at us to see if we have the interesting job.
Yes, been there, but you're there all the time, and I'm only there I get yelled at for a year. So
what were we called at the last meeting?
Yeah.
Oh, we got a nickname.
Oh,
We were
sucked.
useless.
We all suck. That's what
Yeah,
We
we
all
sucked.
sucked.
We all
Yeah.
sucked.
I need to go back and
We all
watch the
sucked.
video and see if my poker face was good.
This is a good example of how not to deal with the public body.
I think Shelley cut us off real quick as that happened. Was at the very end of the meeting.
I wouldn't take that one. I wouldn't be offended by that one because it's not really that personal. It's pretty generic. So all good. Next steps, so everyone's aware, it's a pretty short time frame, but we're moving into phase 2, additional public outreach, actually looking at the document and comparing to what we heard. And then as we move into January, actually making a series of recommendations which will form the basis of code changes, which is exciting. So this is all good stuff. And then, you won't be blamed as much, and you can blame Wade and the consultant. So life will be better in 2021, as they say.
It can't be much worse than 2020.
That's, as I looked outside and where I'm in Fort Collins, and there was a fire burning, so it was,
yeah,
you couldn't see, and it was end of days again. So yes, 2021 it all begin.
So Bruce, I've sent some comments already to you guys, but just the formatting and the format of the document itself, so it's more usable, would be really helpful.
Right. That's been mentioned, both, digital component to, streamlining is definitely on the list. So it's long. Wade, any closing remarks?
None from me. I think you all have been great. Appreciate the time and the comments. And as Bruce said, you all know where to find me. So if you have any other thoughts pop up, let me know.
Perfect. Thanks, Wade, Bruce, Melissa. Appreciate y'all's time. Staff, we'll do staff's choice since we're at the meeting. We have cases next month? Is that correct?
Bye, Bruce. Bye, Melissa. Yes, we have 3 cases next month.
Okay.
We have, see if I can remember them. We have two of them are setback cases, and then one is another waiver of the STR requirement case. So.
Okay.
One of the setbacks cases also has a bulk plane issue, so there's 2 in that one application, but then the other one is just setback, I believe.
Perfect. And that meeting is on what day, Shelley? Because we've moved it, right?
It's going to be the 18th.
18th. All right. Dugan, anything for us?
I have no report this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Board, anything y'all want to discuss? All right. Again, I appreciate everyone's time, and everyone how everyone's candor and help with this. I think it's, you know, it helps everyone out. So I think that's it. So I'll adjourn the meeting and we'll see you guys next month, probably for an hour or so with 3 fun cases. Hydrate. All right. See y'all.
Good night.
Good night.